The fog clung to the dirt road like a shroud wrapping the outskirts of Ohio's pine forest in a cold, indifferent haze. Discarded bottles and crumpled wrappers littered the ditch remnants of careless passers-by who treated this stretch as a dumping ground. In the midst of it all lay a woman, motionless, her body half buried in the mud and frost of early winter. Her face was a swollen mask of bruises, lips split and crusted with dried blood that matted her dark hair. Her arms hung limp rope burns raw on her wrists where bindings had been roughly torn away. The once elegant suit jacket was shredded buttons scattered like lost memories, and one high-heeled shoe lay orphaned a few feet away. Nearby, the charred skeleton of a wheelchair smoldered faintly, its wheels warped by deliberate flames. She looked like refuse, discarded, broken, unworthy of a second glance. Cars sped by on the distant highway, their headlights slicing through the mist without pause. No one stopped. No one cared. In a civilized world this shouldn't happen, but here she was, abandoned to the elements, her breath shallow and fading. Chase Hale pedaled his battered bicycle along the rutted path, his muscles aching from the overnight shift at the old machinery repair shop in town. At 35, life had worn him down like the rusty gears he fixed for a living, long hours, for little pay, just enough to keep the leaky roof over his head and food on the table for his 6-year-old daughter, Belle. The cold wind bit through his thin jacket, but he pushed on, eager to get home before dawn broke fully. His mind wandered to Belle, probably still curled up with her stuffed rabbit, dreaming innocent dreams in their small wooden cabin. He swerved to avoid a pothole, nearly losing balance, when something caught his eye in the ditch, a dark shape that didn't belong among the trash. At first he thought it was a discarded bag, perhaps from some camper's litter. But as he slowed and pulled out his phone's flashlight, the beam revealed a pale hand, slender and mud-streaked, twitching faintly. His heart slammed against his ribs. What the? He dropped the bike and scrambled down the embankment, thorns snagging his jeans. Up close, the horror unfolded, a woman beaten beyond recognition, her body limp and exposed to the freezing air. Blood streaked her face, and her legs lay unnaturally still, as if disconnected from the rest of her. "Miss, can you hear me?" Chase's voice cracked, echoing in the empty woods. No response, just a weak groan that sounded like her last breath. Instinct kicked in, the same protective surge that woke him at night when Belle had a nightmare. He couldn't wait for help. In this remote spot, an ambulance might take too long, and she was already turning blue from the cold. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped it around her frail form. She was lighter than he expected, like lifting a starved child, her body cold and unresponsive in his arms. He hoisted her carefully, her head lolling against his shoulder, and trudged back up to his bike. Balancing her awkwardly, he walked the remaining mile home, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The cabin appeared through the trees, a weathered wooden structure with a sagging porch and flickering porch light, the only warmth in the pre-dawn chill. Inside, he kicked the door shut against the wind and carried her to the worn couch by the fireplace. The room was sparse, a few mismatched chairs, a threadbare rug, and the faint smell of wood smoke. Belle's toys scattered the floor, a reminder of the life he fought to maintain since his wife left years ago, abandoning them both in the wreckage of betrayal and debt. He stoked the fire to life, then fetched warm water and rags from the kitchen. Gently he cleaned the blood from her face, dabbing at the wounds with salt water to stave off infection. Her breathing steadied slightly under his care, but she remained unconscious. As he worked, something metallic tumbled from her torn collar, a broken necklace chain, its pendant engraved with VCR. He set it aside, wondering who she was. What monster could do this? Belle stirred in the next room, her small voice calling out sleepily. Chase glanced toward her door, his heart twisting. He couldn't let her see this yet. Returning to the woman's side, he pulled a blanket over her and whispered more to himself than to her. "I don't know who you are, but I know the world was wrong to leave you like that." The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls as the first light of dawn crept through the frosted window. Chase sat vigil, his mind racing with questions, unaware that the stranger on his couch was no ordinary victim. The first hints of dawn filtered through the cabin's thin curtains, casting a pale glow over the room. Valentina Cross stirred slowly, her eyelids fluttering open to an unfamiliar warmth. No sterile hospital beeps, No antiseptic sting in the air, just the faint crackle of embers in the fireplace and the soft rhythmic breathing of a child nearby. Pain surged through her like a wave, every breath tearing at her ribs, but it was the numbness below her waist that sent panic flooding her veins. She tried to shift her legs, but nothing happened. Her hands clawed at the blanket, fingers trembling as fragments of memory crashed back the betrayal, the blows, the fire consuming her wheelchair. A gasp escaped her cracked lips and footsteps hurried from the kitchen. Chase appeared, his face etched with concern, kneeling to her eye level. "You're awake. Don't be afraid. You're safe here." His voice was steady, but his eyes held a quiet intensity, the kind born from his own scars. Valentina's gaze darted around the room, the rough wooden walls, the faded quilt over her, the small bed in the corner where a little girl slept clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Where's my wheelchair?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. Chase hesitated, his jaw tightening. It was burned. I found you in the ditch beaten and left there. I couldn't save it." Her eyes squeezed shut, tears carving silent paths down her bruised cheeks. No sobs, no outburst, just a resigned acceptance that twisted Chase's gut. She had expected this somehow. He offered her water, helping her sip slowly, but her mind raced. This man, this stranger, had pulled her from the brink. Why, what did he want? 2 days passed in a haze of pain and tentative care. Valentina's wounds began to heal under Chase's makeshift nursing bandages, changed, broth spooned patiently. She refused painkillers from his meager supply, her pride a fragile shield. When he handed her an old phone suggesting she call someone, her laugh was bitter chilling. "If you call them, they'll come back to finish the job." Chase froze the phone heavy in his hand. "Who family?" She nodded, her eyes distant. "Especially family." That afternoon, a knock echoed through the cabin. Chase opened the door to 2 police officers, their expressions grave badges glinting in the weak sunlight. They'd been canvassing after reports of a suspicious fire near the road. One held a file, flipping through photos. "Mr. Hale, the woman you rescued is Valentina Cross." Chase blinked, uncomprehending. The officer inhaled deeply. "CEO of Cross Technologies. Personal assets estimated at $2.3 billion. The room spun. Chase turned to look at her lying on his threadbare couch, wrapped in his old blanket. This battered woman was one of America's most powerful figures. A titan of tech featured in magazines, now reduced to this. Valentina's voice cut through the silence, weak but resolute. "They didn't do this for money. They did it because I wouldn't disappear." The officers leaned in as she recounted, her words measured each one a blade. 2 years ago, a car accident had left her paralyzed from the waist down. The board at Cross Technologies whispered doubts about her leadership, a woman in a wheelchair at the helm. Her half-sister, Veronica Cross, stepped in as help, promising to manage things temporarily. "She said I needed rest," Valentina murmured, her fists clenching. "But that night, they invited me for a family talk, drugged my drink, beat me until I couldn't fight back. Then they burned my wheelchair right in front of me." Her voice cracked. "She said, 'You don't fit the company image anymore.'" The officers took notes, promising an investigation, but Chase's blood boiled, not for greed or power, but because she was no longer perfect. He paced the room after they left, fury simmering. Valentina watched him, her defenses cracking. "You don't have to do this. I'm a liability." Chase stopped meeting her gaze. "No one's touching you while I'm breathing." Belle, who had woken and hovered in the doorway, padded over silently. She placed her stuffed rabbit on Valentina's chest. "You can have this when you can't sleep." The simple gesture shattered something in Valentina. For the first time since the ditch, she allowed herself to cry, not as a CEO, not as an asset, but as a human stripped bare. That night, as the fire died down, Chase sat by the window watching the stars emerge. He had decided she could stay. No questions about her empire, no expectations. Just space to heal. Between them hung an unspoken understanding, 2 souls scarred by betrayal, now sharing the same fragile shelter. The cabin felt smaller, heavier, with secrets, but for the first time in years, it also felt like a beginning. 2 weeks had slipped by in the quiet rhythm of the cabin, each day a fragile bridge between survival and something resembling life. Valentina's bruises had faded to yellowed shadows, her cuts scabbing over under Chase's careful attention. She could sit up now, propped against pillows on the couch that had become her makeshift bed. But the paralysis below her waist remained a cruel constant, a void where sensation should be. Chase had fashioned a simple ramp from scrap wood for the front porch, allowing her to wheel herself outside on borrowed crutches repurposed as handles. He never made a fuss about it, just left the tools where she could reach them as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yet every act of kindness gnawed at her. Mornings brought the ritual of dressing. Chase averting his eyes while handing her clothes, his hands steady but distant. She hated the vulnerability, the way her arms trembled from the effort of pulling on a shirt. "You can stop making me feel useless," she snapped one crisp morning, her voice sharper than intended, as he set a basin of warm water beside her. Chase paused, his coffee mug halfway to his lips, his expression unreadable. "I've never seen you as useless. I just see pain." The words hung between them, simple and piercing, but she turned away, biting back the retort that burned in her throat. That evening, with Belle tucked in early after a mild fever, the tension boiled over. Valentina stared at the manual wheelchair Chase had scavenged from a neighbor, a basic model, nothing like the custom electric one she'd lost to the flames. Determination fueled her. She would not ask for help again. Gripping the couch arm, she swung her lifeless legs over the edge, her upper body straining as she tried to pivot onto the chair. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her breaths coming in short gasps. Halfway there, her grip slipped, and she tumbled forward, crashing to the floor in a heap of tangled limbs and frustration. Pain shot through her shoulders, but it was the humiliation that stung deepest. Chase burst in from the kitchen, his face paling at the sight. "What are you doing?" He knelt, reaching to lift her. "I'm trying to live like a person, not a patient," she shouted, shoving his hands away, her fists pounding weakly against his chest. "I don't need your pity." He caught her wrists gently, not restraining, but steadying, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'm not pitying you, Valentina. I'm angry." She stilled breath, hitching. "Angry that you think no one can be kind without wanting something. Angry at whatever broke you enough to believe that." The fight drained from her, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Tears welled unbidden as memories flooded back uninvited. 2 years ago, the screech of tires on rain-slicked roads, the impact that shattered her spine. Waking in the hospital tube snaking from her arms, her half-sister Veronica at her bedside with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You should get used to looking up at the world," Veronica had said, her voice laced with mock sympathy, as if the accident were a convenient downfall. The board meetings that followed were worse whispers in the corridors of Cross Technology's doubts about her fitness to lead. "A CEO in a wheelchair, it sends the wrong message." One director had murmured, not quietly enough. Valentina had fought clawing her way through rehab, proving her mind sharper than ever. But Veronica's help had been a poison, slowly eroding her position until that fateful night. Chase released her hands, sitting back on his heels. "You think you're the only one who's known pain." His voice was low, raw. He glanced toward Belle's door, his features softening with old sorrow. "I built a small contracting business. Once, nothing like your empire, but it was mine. Friends invested, family cheered me on. Then a bad deal, embezzlement I didn't see coming. Lost everything. My wife walked out, said she couldn't handle the failure. Left me with Belle, barely a toddler, and debts that still chase me." He rubbed his calloused hands together. "Everyone turned their backs. But I got up every day for her, because giving up wasn't an option." Valentina wiped her eyes, the parallels striking her like a physical blow. Both betrayed by those closest, stripped of what defined them, left to rebuild from ruins. "And now, you're stuck with me," she whispered, half joking, half broken. Chase shook his head. "Not stuck. Choosing." He helped her into the chair, then his touch careful, and wheeled her to the back porch. The night air was crisp, stars piercing the dark sky. They sat in silence, the forest whispering around them. After a while, Chase's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Not possessive, not pitying, just present. She didn't pull away. For the first time, the loneliness that had armored her heart cracked open, allowing a sliver of connection. As the moon rose higher, Chase broke the quiet. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But if you want to stay, not as a CEO, not as anyone but yourself, then this is home. Valentina didn't speak, but she nodded ever so slightly, a quiet surrender to the possibility of trust. The cabin enveloped them in its humble warmth, two wounded souls finding solace in shared silence. 2 months blurred into a tentative routine within the cabin's walls, the days lengthening with the promise of spring. Valentina had grown accustomed to maneuvering the manual wheelchair Chase had sourced her arms, strengthening from the effort of propelling herself across the uneven wooden floors. She no longer needed his help for every small task. Mornings found her wheeling to the kitchen where sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating the simple counters. The pain in her ribs had dulled to a manageable ache, but the paralysis remained an unyielding barrier, a reminder of what had been stolen. Yet in this humble space she began to reclaim fragments of herself, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet acts of daily living. She started with cooking her hands, steadying over pots and knives for the first time in years. No longer dictating menus to assistants, she experimented with simple recipes, oatmeal laced with wild berries from the forest edge, or stew simmered on the wood stove. "This tastes like freedom," she murmured one evening, spooning a bowl for Belle, who beamed and declared it better than princess food. Afternoons were spent in the back garden, where Valentina and Belle knelt, or in her case leaned from the chair to plant seeds, sunflowers for height and hope, lavender for its soothing scent. Dirt smeared her fingers, and at first she recoiled, accustomed to sterile boardrooms. But Belle's laughter as she chased a butterfly coaxed a genuine smile from Valentina. "You're fighting over the watering can with a 6-year-old, Chase teased from the porch, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "At least now, I have a co-founder who listens better than my old board," she shot back, glancing at Belle with a warmth that surprised even her. The three of them laughed together, the sound echoing off the trees like a balm. When a contact from her old life offered a state-of-the-art electric wheelchair, Valentina declined. "I don't want something that makes me feel pushed along," she explained to Chase, her voice firm. Instead, she chose a lightweight manual model customized with a cushion for comfort. Belle insisted on pink accents, like a princess on a tank. And for the first time, Valentina selected something purely for herself, not for image or efficiency. It arrived by mail, and she tested it on the porch ramp, the wheels crunching over gravel. Chase watched from afar, not intervening, respecting her need for independence. Evenings wove them closer, the fire's glow fostering stories that bridged their worlds. Belle demanded tales after dinner, curling between them on the couch. Not fairy tales, but real ones. Chase recounting how he rebuilt his life after his business crumbled, piecing together odd jobs to keep Belle fed. Valentina sharing fragments of her dreams before the accident visions of tech that empowered the overlooked. They spoke of new aspirations born in this wooden haven, perhaps a workshop for repairs or classes on resilience. Belle listened wide-eyed, her head on Valentina's lap. "Tell about the time you flew in a big plane." She'd beg, and Valentina would oblige, her voice softening as memories shifted from pain to possibility. No one pressed her to reclaim her CEO throne. The empire felt distant, irrelevant here. Chase didn't teach her to walk again. He taught her to believe in staying seated and being present without apology. His gestures were understated, brewing her favorite herbal tea exactly as she liked, hot, but not scalding, asking her opinion on fixing a neighbor's generator, valuing her sharp mind, leaving wildflowers on the table after his shifts. "What do you want tonight?" he'd ask, not out of obligation, but genuine care. For Valentina, who had commanded rooms of executives yet never been asked her true desires, it was revolutionary. The simplicity healed her in ways therapy never could. No expectations, just existence. One night with Belle dozing early after a day of play, they sat reviewing shaky videos Belle had captured on an old phone garden. Mishaps, cooking fails, moments of unfiltered joy. Laughter filled the room as a clip played of Valentina's first attempt at weeding, ending in a muddy tumble. When the screen went dark, Valentina turned to Chase, her eyes alive with a vulnerability she hadn't felt in years. "You know, you're the first person to see me as a woman, not a disability." He set the phone aside, his hand brushing hers. "You don't have to be anyone to deserve love." The words hung electric, and she cupped his cheek, drawing him close. Their first kiss was gentle, a whisper of lips born not from pity, but from mutual understanding, a shared recognition of brokenness, mended by time. In that simplicity, healing took root. Valentina felt for the first time that she had come home long ago. The three of them, Chase, Belle, and her, formed an unspoken family bound by quiet acts of care rather than blood or wealth. The cabin, once a refuge from ruin, now pulsed with the steady beat of belonging. Spring arrived earlier than usual that year, thawing the Ohio frost and coaxing green shoots from the soil. In the backyard, the sunflowers Valentina and Belle had planted stretched tall, their golden faces turning toward the light. Belle darted between them, her laughter ringing out as she declared the patch their sunflower forest. The lavender bloomed nearby, its scent drifting on the breeze, a quiet testament to the healing that had taken root in the once barren ground. Valentina wheeled herself along the path Chase had graveled for easier access, her fingers brushing the petals, a small smile playing on her lips. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her old life lifting, replaced by something lighter, more real. She had no intention of returning to Cross Technologies. The calls from shareholders and reporters had come and gone, offers of reinstatement laced with apologies that rang hollow. "I'm done being a figurehead," she told Chase one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching Belle play. Instead, they transformed the abandoned shed behind the cabin into a modest center called the Second Start, a place for people like them, those with disabilities, single parents, scraping by young adults who dropped out and lost their way. Chase handled the repairs, turning the space into workshops for machinery fixes and basic trades. Valentina led sessions on practical skills, drawing from her tech background, to teach simple coding and design, but more importantly, resilience. "You don't have to be perfect to build something worthwhile," she'd say to the small groups that gathered, her voice steady from the front of the room. Life settled into a simple cadence, far from boardrooms or balance sheets. Chase still worked his shifts at the repair shop, but evenings found him tinkering in the center with Valentina at his side, her insights sharpening his designs. Belle appointed herself Joy Director, flitting about with homemade certificates scrawled in crayon, "Best Helper Today," or "Super Strong Friend." She handed them out with solemn pride, her energy a glue binding the community. No one questioned Valentina's wheelchair. Here it was, just part of who she was. Not a flaw to hide. Their love unfolded quietly without fanfare. Chase never uttered grand declarations. He showed it in the details, brewing her tea to the perfect temperature, leaving space and conversations for her thoughts, holding her hand during quiet evenings when memories surfaced. "You've never said, 'I love you,'" she teased one night as they lingered over dinner, Belle's plate cleared, and the girl sketching at the table. Chase set down his fork, his gaze soft. "Because I don't want words you might forget. I want to live it so you see it every day." She didn't press. Instead, she squeezed his hand, the gesture speaking volumes. One warm afternoon, after a class wrapped up, Valentina found Chase waiting on the porch, dressed in his faded button-down, holding a small wooden box he'd carved himself. No jewels, no extravagance, just the grain of oak polished smooth. He opened it to reveal a folded paper, Belle's handwriting wobbly but earnest. "If my dad loves you, please don't leave like people do. I need 2 grown-ups to hug every morning. Love, Belle." Tears pricked Valentina's eyes as she read it. Chase knelt beside her chair, his voice low and steady. "I don't have much a leaky roof, a daughter who asks too many questions, and a heart that's been shattered before, but if those 3 things are enough for a new start, then—" He extended his hand, not asking for marriage in so many words, but offering everything. "Will you come home with me every day forever?" Valentina's breath caught the world narrowing to this moment. "I've been home for a while now," she whispered, placing her hand in his. They didn't need rings or ceremonies. The promise was sealed in the quiet, in the way Belle burst out from behind the door cheering and wrapping her arms around them both. The story didn't end with fireworks or fanfare. It lingered in the warmth of their wooden home in evenings with hot tea and homemade cookies in the glow of the porch light, casting three shadows, a man, a woman, and a little girl dancing amid the sunflowers. Wounds that once seemed like endings had become commas, pausing only to usher in the most worthwhile chapter, proof that kindness could rewrite even the cruelest fates.